Okay, so after you get your grid drawn, you're going to gather your supplies. Uh, I already put out my colors. I put 6 dots of each color because what we're going to do is, what you're going to do is Quin Rose is going to go here, Pyrrole Scarlet. So all the original colors are going to go down this center. And I'm going to show you how to do those first. And then what you're going to do is actually mix Quin Rose with Pyrrole Scarlet, with New Gamboge, Hansa Yellow, and then you're going to do the same with each color. But you're not going to do it exactly in that order because when you mix Pyrrole Scarlet with Quin Rose, then when you come over here and do Pyrrole Scarlet, you're going to mix it again with Quin Rose. So I'm going to have you do both of these at the same time. This one's going to be more saturated. This one's going to be less saturated. So that's why I'm doing this demo so you can see it in real time. Once I do most of the boxes, or about half of the boxes, I'm going to speed it up. And then I'm going to do this part separately. So I have everything here so you can see what I've gathered, but I'm going to organize it a little bit better. I'm going to put my water on this side. I don't want it on top of here because I don't want to spill it on other stuff. I'm going to have to put my cat in his bedroom. Okay, so Quin Rose, and the reason they're labeled like this is because this red leans to the blue. So I don't know, I might leave a bottle up here. So I have 2 jars, one for getting water, one for cleaning my brush. Probably am going to leave them up here because this is so large. I usually don't use such a large palette. Use whatever you have. It looks like I lost a couple of my blue, ultramarine blue drops over there. So you just have to barely touch it. You just need tiny drops. You have much smaller tube than I do. My tubes are 15 mil. Your tubes are 1/3 this size. So you do want to just take the lid off, and I'll replace those 2 ultramarine, French ultramarine dots. Yeah, those are French ultramarine. And you just can touch and put it down. Watercolors are very concentrated because you dilute them with water. That's why they're called watercolor. So, and the trick with it is learning how to use the right amount of water to pigment ratio. And when I say pigment, I mean the actual watercolor paint, because basically that's what it is. Pigment mixed with some gum arabic, sometimes honey, so that when they dry they re-wet easily. So you can see that I'm saturating it pretty deeply. I'm going to dry my brush and get clean water and pull some of that color just by adding water to this side so that I get a lighter wash on this half, and that'll kind of show you what that color can do. It can be a pink or it can be a more vibrant blue-red. Move on to Pyrrole Scarlet. Pyrrole Scarlet is leans more towards the yellow, so it's closer to like a fire engine red, but it's really more orange than that. To get a fire engine red, you would really mix both of these together, which we'll see in a bit. So I had a better ratio of water to pigment here because see, it's not pooling the way this is pooling at the bottom. So after I finish this square, I'm going to go back up and pull out some of the water from the other one. And you can see how this is a method also of softening your edges, because when you do watercolor you can have soft edges or you can have hard edges. I'm hoping that I'm not getting my head in the... No, I'm not. So here I'm going to dry my brush and pull out some of this. But now to make that half darker, I'm going to go back and with just a little bit of water on my brush, pick up more pigment and deposit it. And it looks a little blotchy, but as it dries, it's going to darken. I mean, it's going to smooth out. And I think I need a little more pigment in here. And this part seems fussy, but all the other blocks, you're just going to paint them a solid color because these are going to be the more saturated version and these are going to be the not so saturated version. And now we're on to New Gamboge. This is the only color in your kit in these colors that is a mixed pigment color, which means that all the other colors, they just have one pigment in them. And so when you mix two colors, you know that you're only mixing two colors, whereas this already has two colors in it. So when you mix another color with it, you're mixing a third color, which is okay. But the more, just to know, the more colors that you mix, that's when you can get into trouble with sort of muddy, dirty colors. But then sometimes you might want to have a dark color and you might mix a lot of colors together to get a brown or a black, which is actually an exercise we're going to do at the end down here. This is Hansa Yellow. So that was the yellow that leans to the red, and it's almost an orangish yellow. And now we're going to do Hansa Lemon Yellow, Hansa Yellow, which is kind of like a lemon yellow. It leans towards the green. And the reason it's a good thing to know this is because you can mix colors better if you know which way they lean. I should have waited for that to dry a little or gotten rid of some of that puddle, because you can see how if you let the water touch, the color is going to bleed into that other color, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to just try to leave that there and just try to make sure it doesn't continue on. So now I'm going to get some water, but not too much, and pull some of this yellow. The yellows are harder sometimes to get lighter values. If you saw on the color wheel, diluting that yellow was harder to do than the blue. So now we're going to phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is a blue that leans to the yellow. So these are in order also, like the color wheel. Phthalo blue. And phthalo blue is a really strong color, so you want to be careful careful about how much you use of it when you're mixing with another color. It's really brilliant, but it also dilutes down to a nice light blue. So you want to be careful about using too much water. And then the last one here is the ultramarine blue. And I put these out last night, but I still just have to dab a little bit of water to re-wet them. So if you prefer working out of like pans, you could always just pour some into something and let them dry. Or if you have some out and you don't use it all, you can just let it dry, cover it so you don't get a lot of dust, or like I would get like pet hair in it. And then when you want to use it again, uncover it and everything will just re-wet. So you don't have to throw it out if it dries up on you. So again, a little bit of water, but not too much. And this is your only, out of all of these colors, I believe this is the only granulating color. So granulation just means that when you put it onto the paper, you can start to see some of the actual little pigments settle into the paper and you see a texture. And that's something that a lot of people find very desirable. Some people don't like it, so it depends on what you want. Now we're going to go into the actually mixing the colors. A lot of people like to just mix their colors on their paper, but for the purposes of this assignment, you need to actually have a palette that you're mixing your colors on. So we're going to take quinacridone rose and mix it with pyrrole scarlet. And since we're on this half, we're going to use a lighter version and go quin rose and pyrrole scarlet. So that's these two. Quin rose and this is why I have 6 different dots, because once I'm sticking this brush in here and sticking it in here, I'm contaminating both of these dots. And so I could tell that that's now kind of a color between the two of them. And that's why it's good to mix on a white surface too. So here, but I want it to be, so you know what, I'm going to do the darker one first and then the lighter version over here. So I put my arm into that wet paint. So sometimes it's better to move your paper around, and you want to try to leave a little gap so that you don't pull the one color into the other color that you're painting. So this is my more saturated version, so I want to make it darker. And that just means that it doesn't have as much water to pigment ratio. So that's a nice deep. And you can see that it's in between these two. It's more of like a fire engine red. And so now I'm going to dip my brush in the water again and dilute it a little. And it will be a lighter version of pyrrole and quin rose. Pyrrole and quin rose right here. This way it was quin rose and pyrrole that way. So this makes a nice pink. But you would have, so this is also pink, but you can see that this pink is more of a red that leans to the yellow pink. And I'm going to pull out. So another thing about watercolor is as it dries, it loses saturation. So there's a color shift. Some colors, the shift is more than others, and you'll notice that when you do it and you see it wet, and then when you see it dry, it's going to be different. So Quin Rose New Gamboge. And I'm going to start with this dot now. And come over here. And I think that's a good color, but I might need to mix some more so that I can do both the saturated version and the not saturated. And you can see that I'm hardly using any of that color. My dots are really too big, but I can keep using this palette for more demos. So I think that's good. New Gamboge and Quin. So Quin Rose and New Gamboge. That's here. Quin Rose, New Gamboge. So it's an orange color because we mixed a red and a yellow. And it's a pretty brilliant orange because we mixed the yellow that leans red rather than the yellow that leans green. So if I don't pull that out, you'll get a backwash and a bloom. So see this? What happens is, like when there's a lot of water, a pool of water, as it dries, it pushes the pigment up and it leaves a like a bloom. That's called a watercolor bloom. And it can be desirable, or sometimes it can be undesirable. You can see I have a bloom right there and kind of there too, but not so much. Okay, so now we want the lighter version of that here, Quin Rose and New Gamboge. So more water. Maybe a little more color. You want to give yourself enough time for this exercise. It's not really something that you want to try to do really quickly, but you want to be methodical and think about what you're doing while you're doing it. So now, Quin Rose and hands a yellow. And that one's contaminated already, so Quin Rose and hands a yellow. So now I'm mixing with the yellow that leans to the blue. So hands a yellow and Quin Rose. So you can see how this is kind of a duskier orange. Not that much difference though. Okay, so add more water. And hands of yellow and quin rose up here. I can see the difference more in the lighter version. I guess I can see these, but it's hard to tell when they're still wet because, like I said, they do change as they dry. Okay, quin rose and phthalo blue. And I can tell which dot I've already used by the water being on it. And phthalo blue, I didn't mix this with anything yet, so use that. Now phthalo blue is a bully. You can see that it looks blue still, so I'm just going to take some of this blue and bring it over here and mix it with the red. Okay, so I've got a nice purple, but I'm going to get a little more phthalo. Okay, so now I'm going to quin rose, phthalo blue. So when you do that, what you can do is you can just take whatever you're using to dry your brush and blot it just to separate it so that it doesn't bleed in all the way. And I'm going to dry my brush a little to pull up some of this water. Could be a little darker. And dry my brush, pick up some water, thin this out. I think I need more water because it's a very strong color, not only in mixing, but also it stains your paper. Some of the colors you can lift with a dry rag. If you have color and it's too saturated or you dropped it and it's not where you want it to be, you can lift it off with a rag. But some colors will come off more than others because some colors are more staining. And that's kind of one of the things we're going to explore over here. So that's done. One more color with quin rose. So you probably only need 5 dots because I used the same dot that I painted that with to mix with one of the colors. So French ultramarine. You probably can't see that. Okay, that goes here. So this is a nicer purple, or a more brilliant purple, because it's a red that leans to blue and a blue that leans red, where this blue leaned yellow. I want to get a nice saturation of color in here without having too much water. So I'm just depositing dense pigment. So I have a high ratio of pigment to water on my brush right now, and just sort of dotting it in to where there's already water. And that should dry pretty evenly. That's probably not enough water to cause a bloom, but we'll see. So dry my brush and get some water to dilute this. So by doing this exercise, you're gaining some dexterity in using your brush with the watercolor. You're also learning to control your ratio of pigment to water. So now we're going to go to the next color, which will be Pyrrole Scarlet. So this is my row of Pyrrole Scarlet, and I'm going to mix Pyrrole Scarlet with New Gamboge. Pyrrole New Gamboge, Pyrrole Scarlet, New Gamboge. So Pyrrole Scarlet and New Gamboge. That's lemon yellow. Okay, so I'm glad I caught that. I'll just skip over to Hansa, not lemon yellow, Hansa yellow. This is PY3, pigment yellow through number 3, and a lot of manufacturers just refer to it as lemon yellow. So that's Pyrrole Scarlet and lemon yellow. Pyrrole Scarlet and lemon yellow here. And this is my saturated version. Maybe I need more Pyrrole Scarlet. And not a color that I'm a big fan of, but it would probably be a nice skin tone when we dilute it and use it with less saturation. Hansa yellow and Pyrrole Scarlet. If I left all that water, it would definitely make a bloom. So it would make a nice skin tone, but I am going to add a little more value to it. And now I'm going to go back to the new gamboge, which I had skipped. So, Pyrrole Scarlet and new gamboge. Mix enough so I get both saturations with the same color. So this looks like a real pumpkin orange. This is going to be a long video, so I really recommend, I should have said at the beginning, just like working while you watch the video, which I hope you're doing. Or once you get what we're doing, you don't have to watch the video. But I've tried posting just part of this, and people get confused and they want to see the entire thing. So I'm just going to do it all in real time, and then I'll also post one that's sped up. So dilute this. So if you feel like you know what you're doing, you don't have to watch the rest of this video, because I'm going to do this part in a separate video and post it underneath. This is probably also could be a nice skin tone if it was diluted really super light. Maybe it needs a little pink. To be more of a skin tone. Anyways, so that's those two colors, and now we're going on to Phthalo Blue. Pyrrole Scarlet and Phthalo Blue. That's Pyrrole Scarlet. And I know Phthalo's a big bully, so I should probably just bring some Phthalo over here. This is the Phthalo. And you can expect this to be a very dark color because we're mixing two complementaries. These are opposite each other on the color wheel. I thought I had it on the other side. But they're opposite on the color wheel, which makes them complementary colors. Means that when you mix them, you're going to get a gray, a black, depending on what you're mixing more of. I think I like this color better with more blue than Pyrrole, so I'm going to go with that. Because you might as well try to mix the colors that you think you want to use, that you could use more. So, Pyrrole Scarlet, Phthalo Blue, very dark because they're complementary colors, the opposite each other on the color wheel. And they're referred to as complementary colors. The other red and green are complementary, orange and blue are complementary, and yellow and purple are complementary. So I always dry my brush before I put it in my water, my rinse water, so that, and this color was so dark, I'm going to really clean that brush. So now this is going to be my clean water. This is almost like a Payne's gray. When you dilute it, it can be a really nice color for shadows. Or you could use it. I think I used it too dark there. I might go back and remove some of that pigment. So you can see the influence of the blue in this mix. It's like a blue-gray. so I'm going to come back and there's too much pigment on there. If you put too much pigment, it can really dull the colors, because watercolor is meant to sort of see some of the white of the paper underneath the color. So I think that works better than what I had. I think I had used it too thick. All right, so now we're going to move on to French ultramarine and pyrrole scarlet. I think I have too much water there. You can see what I'm doing. And this little blob of paint guy came unstuck. It's moving around. Okay, so French ultramarine, and I already did French ultramarine, pyrrole scarlet. No, pyrrole scarlet. Okay, pyrrole scarlet. Maybe I'll take this over here. So again, we're mixing. So this is what it looks like with more orange. This is what it looks like with more blue. Again, I like the more blue, so I'm going to go with this one. And that's going to go here. But that is another way that you could do this chart. Instead of doing saturated, not so saturated, you could say pyrrole scarlet, French ultramarine with more French ultramarine. And then you can go over here and do pyrrole scarlet, French ultramarine with more pyrrole scarlet. So, just for your information. I think I have too much water and not enough pigment, so that's the wrong puddle. Some more pyrrole. Make this a little more saturated, more pigment. I'm bleeding them. I want to stop that. So this is more of a purple, dark purple. That will probably cause a bloom. I'm just going to leave that. All right, so not the dirty water, clean water, more water. And when you do start using color, you know, don't stress out so much about what color to use where, because really what's more important is the contrast and the values, the way that you use values. Okay, so now we're going to do new gamboge. So New Gamboge mixed with Hansa Yellow. So here, New Gamboge. So we're going to get more of a true primary yellow, the yellow that sits between the orange yellow and the green yellow, or the yellow that leans towards the blue. And I think New Gamboge is stronger color, so I'm gonna stick it over here. Move New Gamboge over here so that I can keep pulling lemon. So I think I have a color that's neither this nor this, more of a mustard color actually. So Hansa Yellow and New Gamboge. This actually does feel like it leans more green. Most watercolors are transparent, but I'm feeling like maybe that New Gamboge has a little bit of opacity in it, or semi-opaque, because I'm noticing some opacity in the colors that I mix with that. Okay, so now the lighter version. Maybe I'm going to put a little more New Gamboge in that. It doesn't lean so much to the blue. And now phthalo blue, oh no, New Gamboge and phthalo blue. Yes, phthalo blue and New Gamboge. Nice sort of forest green. I think I need more pigment and less water. Blue, New Gamboge. Too much phthalo. Now lighten that so that we just get a tint. Hands a yellow and phthalo blue. No, new gamboge. We have to finish new gamboge and French ultramarine. So here and here. New gamboge. That had color on it already. Time to clean my brush out better. And I have this other dot I'll use. New gamboge and French ultramarine. You can see that dried out. Now that I wet it, it'll stay in place pretty much. So this new gamboge is close to an orange, so you mix it with the blue and you get, you know, almost a gray-green. So let's see. New gamboge. Do we want more of that? No, I think I like the color better when it leans a little bit more to the ultramarine. It's almost like an avocado green. I might add just a little bit more to make it more of a indigo color. Well, maybe an indigo green. It's still going to be that avocado color, which can be a good color also for foliage, dark areas of grass. Pick up more pigment. I'm feeling like the granulation is showing up. That's because it's the ultramarine. This bled a little into there, so I guess I should dab that space to stop it. You can get some nice effects like that when you're actually working in watercolors. That can be a desirable thing. So lighten this value. Can you see that? Yeah, you can almost see how the colors separate when you mix them. That's kind of nice when you can get that to happen on your paper. So this is a nice sage green when it's diluted. You see how you can control the value by just dropping in a little bit more pigment into areas strategically. And even though it looks a little blotchy, it kind of smooths out as it dries. Here you can see these two colors separated. It's the French ultramarine. That's the granulation causing that separation of colors. That's why some people love granulating colors so much. I'm included. So phthalo blue and Hansa yellow. Here's the Hansa, there's the phthalo, right? Yes. And phthalo blue is a very strong color, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of that. And that's a nice, brilliant green. Hands of yellow, phthalo blue. And that's why you have a split primary palette set of colors, because when you have the three primaries and they leaning each way, you can get better mixes of secondary colors. So your secondary colors are like orange, purple, and green. So we're going to lighten that. That might cause a bloom. There's a lot of water right here. I'm going to pick some up. I think I can pick some up and that'll just flow into there. Now I'm going to dilute that green. Just pick up a little bit of it. Something on my brush. This watercolor tablet that you have, it's not the best watercolor paper, but it's watercolor paper, which is important because if it's not watercolor paper, it doesn't have the texture and of a cold pressed paper, and it also doesn't have the thickness maybe, because this is 140-pound paper and you need paper that thick to absorb the water without completely buckling and not letting you control where your paint goes, because the water will just flow into the crevices of buckled areas. So I'm just going to pull out some of this water here and maybe drop in some more pigment. It has a higher pigment to water ratio. And it's just sort of getting absorbed into the water that's already on the page. Let's see how that dries. So you can see here this water is going to create a bloom, so I'm going to lift some of that out. Although I would like that to be a little bit darker, so I'm just going to mix a little bit more of this. And drop some of that in there. And this looks like a different color. Needs more yellow. Okay, so hands a yellow and French ultramarine. I bet my brush is dirty. Hands a yellow and French ultramarine. I think I like this color better. I'm going to go with that. Need more pigment to water ratio. I don't know if you can hear the parrots out there. There's wild parrots in my neighborhood. I think they're all over the San Gabriel Valley. And I think I'm picking up cat hairs from the shirt I'm drying my brush on. All right, more water. Maybe I'm going to pick up a little bit of that moisture. You can see that drop I dropped there. I'm just going to dry it so I don't smear something. Clean my brush. Oh, I didn't really have to clean it because I'm going to do the same color. Now, one more, French ultramarine and phthalo blue. So we'll get a blue in between the two blues. So French ultramarine is the weaker color, so I'm gonna make a puddle of that first. And then just pick up some of the, so I used that entire dot. And I can see the influence. It's like just taking it over pretty much. I'll try that on here. That looks too much. Can you take some of this ultramarine? I'm gonna. See how we still see I can recognize a lot of the phthalo still in there. So now there's the French ultramarine in there. Okay. So this is these two colors mixed together. One of the things about watercolor is that once it dries, you can glaze and put more color over it. Like if you want to darken your color, or say you want to make that a little brighter, you might put a yellow on top of it. You might want to make that darker. You would just put the same color over darker on it. And I might go back before I photograph this and actually darken the original colors that are in here so you can see the difference better. I'm going to leave the light versions, but I think I'm going to darken the darker ones because you can see how much more saturated this is than these two colors. But this is just going to be a deeper blue because we're mixing both of these blues. So now I'm going to dilute and put in just a tint. So I'm going to take some of the paint off my brush because that blue is really strong. And I think I'm probably even going to dry the brush again and then just use that. So you can see how it is different than either one of these lighter tints because it's both of them together. You could see that when I dried my brush and I came back, the brush soaked up a lot of the water that was on the paper. So it's those kinds of control issues that you want to have when you're using watercolor. You want to be in control of the water. The big mistake I make a lot is too much water, as you might have noticed in this exercise. So this might create a bloom if I leave that much water, so I might just blot some out. And we're done with this part, so I'm going to turn it off and then I'm going to start a new video to show you what to do for this part.